Hello, everyone. I'm Joshua Kitts of the Composed Dream Game Marketplace, and with me today is James Kerr of James Radio Games, and we're going to talk about his upcoming game, his Kickstarter project, Fight to Survive. James has a number of RPG projects in the past. He's worked on over 6 Pendelhaven games, including the recently released Children of Eru. I believe I actually first came across James's work from a Transformers RPG he did, which you can still find out there online, which is a free fan supplement. And I think that I found that before I met him at Phantasm convention in Peterborough, whose shirt I am wearing today in honor of this shared past. So, James, what have I missed?
Well, you pronounced Eru correctly, but my last name is Kerr, so almost. And I have to reflect on what you said, because finding my fan-made dorky 42-page Transformers role-playing game on Reddit was kind of a watershed moment for me. I'm like, have I made it? Like, now that the Redditors are onto this, have I made it? But that dumb, I mean, that's a, I do not have the license for Transformers. That was just for fun. Let's learn things. I did a series of games like that before I actually got into the tabletop role-playing game industry for serious. I am a publisher by trade. I work in trade magazines, and I've been doing that for about 7 years. And I've been lucky enough to get paid for my tabletop role-playing game work for the last 4 years, mostly through Pendelhaven Press, as you say. And I kind of ran the gauntlet with them. I was a writer, and then I got to be an editor, and I got to be a layout artist. And I, in the end, I was a project manager and developer for the mechanics of Children of Eru. So, after that, I was like, well, I might as well put out my own games. I've got things to do, places to be, things to realize.
Ideas that you have.
Yeah, and this is just one of many games on the dockets for Radio James Games, but it was I think it was a passion project, this one, so I wanted to put it out. It's called Fight to Survive. It's role-playing martial arts meets heart. And I frame it that way because it's not like it's a fight club and it's about people getting together and fighting. It's about the reasons why people are getting together and fighting. The moment that made me want to do this game, there were a few kind of impetuses, but one of them was, I don't know how up you are on Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport, but there's a wonderful moment in the movie when it's like 3/4 of the way through, and he's riding a bus in Hong Kong, and he's like quietly reflecting, and Stan Bush is playing this love song On My Own, and he looks over to the seat beside him, and he sees his enemy like in the reflection of the mirror of the seat, a bus seat across from him. He looks over and he's not actually there. He's like, oh, he's feeling haunted by his enemy. And I always thought, like, why doesn't a game do that? Like, why are, like, I don't want to just roll to hit somebody's armor class. Like, I want a game that actually engages with the emotional content and the story content of these ostensibly American martial arts films from like the 70s until like the mid 90s, and sometimes they were period pieces, but more or less they encompassed that kind of structure. And they were criticized for their lousy plots, but like, we're talking about like, girlfriend's been kidnapped, let's go rescue her, and like, somebody stole the dojo's favorite scroll, we need to hit the streets, things like that, right? Like, it's fun stuff. It's fun stuff to go and engage with. But there wasn't a role-playing game that would satisfy that and that would tell those kinds of narratives. I hesitate to use the word story, but give you those kinds of experiences. It just didn't exist. And then the other kind of impetus for design is that there wasn't a role-playing game that really represented martial arts well. So, like, yeah, I want to be grim and I want to be mundane and I want to be et cetera, and I do want to be fun and like jazzy and whatever. But but in terms of martial arts, I didn't want to have to be throwing fireballs just to generate people's interests. Because there's a lot in like punching and kicking and, oh, we did a jumping kick, that's so cool. That is an exciting design space and an exciting conceptual space. But how do you make that relevant, right? How do you make that mechanically relevant and relevant to the players, and relevant to the shared experience and the social contract of what's going on? So I had to design a system from the ground up that both appealed to those emotional qualities and allowed you to participate in martial arts without having to know martial arts, because there have been some martial arts games that just flat out required you to know martial arts. Like, I don't know if you know Eric Wujcik's Ninjas and Super Spies was a particularly comprehensive take in the champion system on, oh, well, Aikido means you've got a +4 dodge under these certain, well, you just need to know the martial art in the first place. Like, I'm sorry, like it's
in part because they're using all sorts of terminology that is direct.
Well, yeah, and also like just understand the tactical basis of what's going on. You're like, in order to buy into that, like, oh, I didn't know. Like, I've heard stories of people role playing who were like, I didn't realize in Marvel's superheroes face rip I had to call a defensive action and I just kept getting hit. Like, if that's what's happening with role playing, it needs to be intuitive. It can be complex, but it still needs to have an intuitive point of entry. And something like Eric Wujcik's Ninjas and Super Spies, not to knock it, like some people are really into champions. You need to come in with so much knowledge about what it is. And on the other side of things is martial arts mechanics and role-playing games that are so heavily abstracted as to be irrelevant. Like, I'm looking at you, Dungeons and Dragons. Like, what the monk breaks down into is effectively just his different, martial arts superpowers. So I wanted to get away from martial arts superpowers. I wanted it to be able to be relevantly interesting to punch and to kick and to block and to grapple. So I had to structure a whole kind of martial arts superstructure and an emotional narrative structure that would drive the action forward. So it wasn't just about people getting into tournaments. It was about people getting into situations like, like the girlfriend being kidnapped, or like, but these things can be as exceptional or as mundane as you choose based on the direction of the game. Sorry, I'm talking at length here. You haven't even asked any questions.
That's totally cool.
I'm just excited about the project because it's an incredibly unique game. It's an incredibly unique setting, because there are a few games that try to emulate fighting games, right?
That sound like they're unique to me. So I've looked at a quick description, right, and don't have much other context, but you've provided that it's diceless, right?
It is diceless. Yeah,
you're just selecting moves to oppose each other, and either this move wins or that move wins.
And the diceless thing terrifies some people, but like the problem with diceless, and when you say diceless, is people think it's all arbitrary. Like it's it doesn't have any grip. But that was the important design consideration, is to make sure, it's diceless, but like it is relevant action happens that builds on other action. So like, have you played Robo Rally? Where you like, no, okay, it's a board game where you're a robot and you assign things beforehand, like the robot's going to go left and then it's going to go right and then it's going to go straight. It's not like that, but it's kind of like that, in that like you're getting into a fight and you're like, I'm going to fight you. Okay. All right. We're ready. We're going to fight. Okay. So as a fighter, I'm going to pick my moves. I'm going to like, I think I want to punch, and I want to kick, and I want to punch again. I think that's what I'm going to do. So I like identify 3 moves, and you identify your 3 moves, and we don't know what each other's moves are. And then whoever like gets to start, like has to make the opening move is a big decision. And then I'm like, well, okay, I punch. And let's say that you kick, and I'm like, oh crap, kick beats punch. And I have to go back to my moves and be like, well, what else have I got? I've got a kick and I've got a punch. Well, I'll try the kick, but my technique has to be higher in kick in order to beat his kick. And so I'm going to kick you. And then we compare technique. And then I'm like, I have a better kicking technique. My leg threads around your leg and kicks you in the face. And then it turns out that you have a grapple. And I'm like, crap, grapple beats kick. And then you wrestle me to the ground. I'm like, all I have left is a punch. And it's a good thing punch beats grapple, because it's kind of rock, paper, scissors. And then I mean, there are defensive moves too that kind of defy that structure. Mm-hmm. There's 5 moves in total. The point is intuitive, easy to understand. It makes a kind of sense. It's not perfect, right? Like, but it makes enough, like in terms of the Venn diagram of easy to learn and complex to implement, it tries to hit that sweet spot. So that's the kind of like battle structure is like matching these moves. Cross contextually, you don't have to be you don't have to be a single opponent. You could be like a whole 1920s hatchet gang of like dissident Tong that are coming after me, and which is just as relevant. It just means that if you hit, you're going to do a lot more damage to me. Or you could be a bank robber with a gun, or you could be a whole car chase, or you could be a et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good universal structure. It's a simple. I describe this system as rules medium, if we're going to say that, because it's not rules light. And so when you say diceless, people go, "Oh God, diceless!" But then there's a few people who go like, "Oh, diceless, tell me more." But
I'm diceless, but tell me more.
It's diceless, but it's relevant because there's meat. There's meat on the bones, and it's a solid structure. And like just going back a little bit, like there are other kind of fighting game tabletop role-playing games, like a few of them that are based on kind of a Street Fighter and an anime structure, and like doing fantastic flying Subaru fireballs and things, and like that's great, like not knocking that, but the purpose for this is to bring it more in line with kind of some fun, if cheesy, genre conventions, and do them with a straight face. Movies like Bloodsport, movies like Hard Times with Charles Bronson, which is about like a 1930s out of work drifter participating in street fights in New Orleans in order to make $1. You're like down on your luck cut type narratives. Of course it can, like, because I can't get away from the influence, it can also accommodate all like Shaw Brothers films, Golden Harvest films, like you can go crazy kung fu. And there are like special moves that you can adopt. I just want to stop short of like, generating psycho power from plates below the match in order to capture their fighting spirit. Like we can maybe do that in an expansion or something. But right now, like let's keep things on the ground and have fun with the genre and have fun with the genre conventions.
Yeah, so I think Kobra Kai is about as crazy as it gets, right?
Kobra Kai is perfect. Kobra Kai is a perfect example because the fighting is interesting, like it's well choreographed, but also the reason why they're getting into a fight always feels relevant. Like they come up with an excuse for Ralph Macchio and Billy Zabka to fight, right? Like it's kind of an excuse, but it's fun and it works. Similarly, and you could do all of Kobra Kai in this game, Fight to Survive. Because each of the characters, just to give you I don't know how deep you want to go here, but like just to give you a deep dive, you've got it's not hit points. You've got a system of checkboxes that determine your health status, but you've also got a system of checkboxes that determine your hardship status, which is like your emotional health. So like you just found out that somebody crashed your sports car. Oh, you took a hardship. And then when your hardship gets to certain plateaus, it provokes certain responses like, oh, I'm going to go drinking because I'm sad about my sports car being wrecked, And if you fill up hardship and exceed that meter, then you're out of the game, just as if you filled up your injury and exceeded that meter and died horribly. You get to the point where you're like, screw this, I'm not participating in this anymore. And like throw your cell phone in your car and walk away. Right, like that kind of deal. Yeah. So what's preventing you from your hardship like going wildly out of control? Because as a game, you're constantly suffering whatever's going on. Is you have a system of comforts, which are the people, places, and things that are important to you. Right. So taking Johnny Lawrence as an example, his like person might be like Ralph Macchio had his rivalry with him, and he might have a place of like his crappy apartment, and he might have a thing of his fancy sports car. And the call to action of every single game is one of those comforts falls under threat. So somebody's stolen your sports car, or the rent is going up on your place, or the Karate Kid challenged you to a rematch or something, right? Like, so the comfort's under threat. You can no longer access it. You can't use its numerical value to like beat back the hardship. The hardship might swallow you. You have to rise and meet the challenge and fight the good fight in order to overcome what you're doing. So there's this conflict of like, fighting is bad. Like, you shouldn't do this. And you're being driven mechanically to engage in this like, violent and questionable lifestyle. So like Kobra Kai, everything breaks out into a fight in the middle of the school hallway at the end of the second season. And then everybody has detention and there's new rules against it. And so there's all these repercussions of living responsibly with violence and yet this draw towards violence. So this tension between, I'm getting far too cultural studies here, I'm sorry, but this tension between the compulsion of a violent lifestyle and the kind of people who are attracted into that lifestyle, and how those decisions impact you. So you have this tension between your comforts and your hardships at all times, pushing and pulling you and driving the action forward. And that's what keeps it within like its genre conventions, and keeps the fighting happening. Not that every session has to involve fighting, but like players can get pretty sneaky.
You
but
can have things that happen where hardships happen that have nothing to do with fighting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and people can come up with solutions sometimes that are pretty creatively like work around having to fight, especially if like people have a real knowing that it's like move versus move and you're matching technique. You want to avoid fights you can't win. And so people get pretty paranoid and pretty sneaky about avoiding those fights. And then other people get like really like, I'm going to do it. And then, rise with their bravery, and bravery becomes something relevant. Mind you, that's bravery testing the player and not bravery testing the character. But, we do what we can mechanically. Like it's all a series of compromises between ease of play and making an accommodating structure. But yeah, if that, I'm sorry if I'm winding around like crazy here, but like it's got an interesting mechanical structure. I've been playing it and running it since 2015.
That was my next question.
Yeah,
answer my questions before I get to ask them. So
sorry, it started life as a game called Metro City Blues, and then Robin D. Laws published a game called Mutant City Blues, and I thought, well, Robin D. Laws is like one of the top 5 names, and like I'm screwed. I can't call it that. So it got rechristened to Fight to Survive. But I ran Metro City Blues both publicly and privately for many years. At Peterborough Phantasm was one place that I ran it several times, and because I knew that I wanted to put it out as a Kickstarter or just put it out. But then I got involved with Pendelhaven and doing things professionally, and I had to put this on the back burner for a little while. And then by the time I got it off, a few things had changed in the role-playing game industry. Blades in the Dark released, and it has some similarities in terms of mechanics. And now people are like, oh, is it like Blades in the Dark? And I'm like, well, parallel evolution is a thing. And Robin D. Laws released Mutant City Blues. So I'm like, well, forget that. We're now Fight to Survive, which is the best name I could think of to go with the content. Okay, I'm going to stop preempting your questions. You can have questions.
No, it's all good. I'm glad you covered playtesting, and I mean it certainly sounds like you've had some experience of the feel of the game, right? And the feel of the game is always really important. So,
well, I mean, not to you can have any creative, wonderful idea you want for a game, but you need to write it down and get it to the table as fast as possible, because the table will determine whether it's a good idea or not. It can't exist solely in your head. You are not the Count of Monte Cristo trapped in a cell trying to make things work. You need to, this is a social environment, and you need to engage with people, and it needs to work at the table. God knows there was enough mechanical choices that I made that got completely vetoed by different playtest groups. Yeah, like it can't exist as can a role-playing game exist as an intellectual exercise? Like, I guess, but that seems like a bit of a waste. To me,
I have a soapbox about this too. My question is always like, how many years have you spent playtesting this? And if you can't say how many years it's been, then I mean, can you?
Yeah, I'm astounded.
In a shorter time than that, yes, but.
Well, most of the development time for a tabletop role-playing game is playtesting, period. Like, and if you're not devoting most of your development time to playtesting, the mechanics are not going to be mature when they get to market. Like, again, I'm coming from a publishing background, so the editorial, that's easy. Even though it can sometimes be a challenge with a tabletop role-playing game book, because it has to serve so many masters. It has to inspire somebody to buy it in the first place. It has to inspire somebody to play it accordingly, and GMs to read it. So inspiration is 1, and 2, it has to act as a teaching tool. It has to teach you the rules, and 3, it has to act as a reference guide for when people need to look things up later. And those 3 mandates often contradict each other. right? So the editorial can sometimes be challenging for a tabletop role-playing game, but that's fine. Like that's under a schedule. We've got I'm sorry it's taken so long to mention him. We've got a fantastic artist with Ian McLean. He did the art that's behind me. You can't really see the guy, but he's got some. And he's worked on books for Call of Cthulhu, for Pathfinder, and for other like professional tabletop role-playing game stuff for about 20 years now. So he's been in the industry longer than I have. So I'm doing like the writing, developing, editorial, et cetera, et cetera. He's doing the art. And then if the Kickstarter funds, I've got an editor lined up and a proofer and a sensitivity reader, because the nature of the content lends itself very squarely to having a sensitivity reader. Yeah, so it's excited. I'm excited. But yeah, playtesting has to be your bread and butter of the time spent, because you can write up like a 200-page book, and if you know the system, you can write it up in a week or two, and like you can get things proofed through the content mill. Art takes a while, right? Like you've got a 200-page book. You're talking like, I think it was 60 pieces of art that got commissioned for this one. That's a couple months. It's like 3 months of work, effectively. You've got somebody who's not full time, because most people who are in tabletop role playing games have day jobs, like myself. So, like, really, but you need to be spending like at least. I can't even imagine, at least 6 months in like hard feedback heavy surveying, playtesting, with blind playtest groups as well as home groups. But I keep talking with developers who are like, oh yeah, I put that out. It was just my home group, whatever. Like we played it for a couple of weeks. I'm like, oh God. I mean, okay. I mean, if it works, it works. But hat in hand for that. So this has been thoroughly play tested. I'm confident in the system. What I'm not confident about is reaching people with the message. Right, is getting like, this is what it's about, because it's very niche. Like it is niche of niche of niche. It's like it's a game of martial arts, and people are like, oh, Naruto, and I'm like, no, no, martial arts. Like
certain classic.
It's like Fight Club. People just beat each other up, and I'm like, no, not that either.
There's like more to it than that.
Like we're getting closer. Like we'll refine down to it, and then so God knows that people will understand it. God knows that people will appreciate it. But it's going to come out whether it funds as Kickstarter or not, because the material's done. And it's just a case of funding the art. And if I have to fund the art independently and then release it on itch and as a PDF and whatever to recoup the cost, so that it can mount again, then we'll do that again, because it's inevitable. It's a juggernaut. It's not going to stop it.
You have to get it out at some point in some fashion.
I've got other projects, frankly. Like I love this project, but I've got other projects too. Other tabletop role playing games to realize. I've got a pulp game. I've got a science fiction game. I've got like a bunch of stuff. Like I love this game. I love this content. I could play this for years. But let's get it out. Let's make it happen. And there's a whole line planned for this of expansion books and other materials. Let's do it. And if people don't want to fund, I'm not being pessimistic, but if people don't want to fund the Kickstarter, fine, we'll just do it. Let's do it grassroots style. Like look at Mothership. Holy crap. They took the long way around, and now they've got $1 gajillion. Good for them. All right. And I'm blabbering.
No, you're excited, and you should be excited. And the game sounds wonderful in many ways. And I am sad that I have not got to play test it at any of those play tests that happened at Phantasm or other places. So a couple smaller questions is to you, like, are you providing any sort of baked in settings, or is it kind of just that, well, it's probably the 80s or the 70s? You talk about that at different levels.
Okay, it takes place across the 20th century. And every play session represents between 1 and 3 years. I don't know if you ever played King Arthur Pendragon, but it had a really good sense of like keeping the years going so that you're just kind of getting snippets of people's lives. The game is happening like that, so that you end up playing a kind of martial lineage that happens over the course of many, many years. So you might end up playing your son or your grandson or your grandson's neighbor or whatever, like as the kind of structure keeps rolling, because characters are fragile. They could fall apart after a couple of sessions, which would be a couple of years of in-game play, and then you have to keep the structure going. So, is there an in-baked setting? Yes, everything happens in a city called Metro City. It's named after the city from Final Fight, but Metro City is like also the city in Astro Boy, so who cares? It's kind of the same structure as like in Fatal Fury, that everything takes place in Southtown. Like the idea is a central location where everything happens, and then it's divided up into different districts, like the harbor and like the industrial district and like the neon strip, which is the sexy downtown, or Parkside, where everyone's wealthy, like et cetera, et cetera. So there's kind of a territorial aspect to the structure, and different things happening in different districts and district pride and et cetera, et cetera. And it's also just a huge excuse. It's an excuse for historical things throughout the 20th century all to happen in the same place, so you don't have to go traveling. So if something happened in San Francisco or in Hong Kong or in New York or in Toronto, like it just, we'll just all put it here, and then it could all happen. So like when Masayama came down from the mountains in 1952 to win the international karate tournament in Japan, you're like, and then he traveled to Metro City in 1953 and went searching through for challengers. Yeah, he's the karate bullfighter. He brings bulls around and punches them and kills them with one blow. It's horrible animal cruelty, but you can challenge him. So trying to weave in historical elements in the kind of his pseudo-historical setting becomes an interesting challenge. But people can deal with that as much as they want to or not to. I've intentionally, I got a whole thing about this, scaled back lore and meta narrative, because the only people who read lore and meta narrative are GMs, right? And the only people who read, the only GMs who read it are the ones who enjoy the world and want to know more about the world. And the conflict is those GMs can never truly make their players care as much about that lore and world as they want as they want them to, right? So instead of making a kind of set meta narrative. Oh, and then the other flip side of things is if you don't allow a meta narrative or a larger lore structure, then people don't take the game seriously, because they say, oh, it's just a light game. It's just like, who cares? It's just a structure of rules. It's like a generic game. It's absolutely not a generic, but regardless, like if you don't provide anything, people don't see that there's a framework and they don't know where to go. The structure of the rules allows for springboarding right off the hop. Like if you're creating a character and you're like, who's your person? My mom. Where's your place? A weightlifting gym. Where's your what's your thing? Pocket knife. And then we springboard off those components and they become the story. They become the structure. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, your pocket knife's been stolen. It's this little kid who's been running around doing pickpocketing. Oh, I don't want to fight a little kid. What am I doing? And he goes back to this Fagin guy who's like 6'7" and full of muscles. Like it's pushing the story that you develop as characters to be unique and interesting. And since it takes place over many years, like you feel that time slipping away and you look down at your character sheet and you're like, I'm 45. How did this happen? And, you start looking towards the future and interacting with the environment. So it's a very player driven as a story. But instead of making a huge meta narrative and lore that require people to read a bunch, because I've done that in the past, like my last book, I did there was over 100 pages of lore, which is, it's great. It's fine. It's cool. But like, I want to make all content actionable. Everything has to be a springboard to on the table behavior. So there should be nothing in Fight to Survive that isn't propelled forward in a player directed way, so that players can take the concept and run with it into their own games and make it personal and meaningful. Because like as a GM, what do? You introduce a whole bunch of NPCs, and do people latch on to the NPC that you spent like hours laboriously thinking about in the shower and you fell in love with? No, they fall in love with the stupid one that you came up on the fly and they said, what's their name? And you didn't have a name and you ended up calling them Francis the Clown. And God knows why that happened. And 10 sessions later, Francis the Clown is the greatest character they've ever known.
Yeah.
So let's lean into that structure. Like what I don't want is for action and behavior in the game to feel arbitrary. I don't want people to feel like whatever. Like there should never, ever, ever be a whatever under any structures. Things should feel meaningful. Choices should feel meaningful. The choices you're presented should feel meaningful. And we need to avoid, from a design perspective, choice paralysis, so that people can feel like they're making meaningful choices and going forward with them without that arbitrary feeling, which often diceless systems get criticized for leading into that arbitrary feeling. So you just make a structure where every choice is relevant and then action gets propelled forward. So what's the lore and setting? That's my answer to like, it's kind of a baked in procedural generator for lore and setting with a few actionable jumping off points as dictated by the structure of districts in this city. Like, so if you choose to be in Chinatown, you know that you've got, underground gambling mahjong parlors that you might have to deal with. If you choose to be in like the Richmond, which is the old town, you know that there's 50s greaser punks walking around in their hot rods. Well, not walking around in their hot rods, but if you're on the docks, that there's lots of shady people doing sketchy dealings in the night and coming in like cargo containers. And the process was making those jumping off points intuitive. Like, yeah, obviously there's an old pier at the docks that's disused, but is known as the fight pier because people often meet there late at night for challenges under a single streetlight. Obviously.
Of course. Why wouldn't there be?
Why wouldn't there be? So that's the
generational aspect is certainly very intriguing. And certainly sort of mirrors, you have movies and series, and usually there's years that go by between them. Do you find, like, are you also having action occur over long courses of time within a session, right? Like, are you like, oh, this happens to you and it takes you a week to get over it or whatever, that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, sometimes, like, a Kung Fu movie is a great template, like a Shaw Brothers Kung Fu movie, right? What happens I'm not going to generalize because they have many and varied plots, but one of the plot conventions is hero is trained to oppose the villain. Hero opposes the villain, loses horribly, has to run away and heal over a long period of time, maybe fall in love. Could be years go by. They encounter a new master, find some secret kung fu technique, go back and confront the villain, right? Like, that's one of the tropes. And the game was structured with that in mind, so that the downtime could take months, it could take weeks, it could take years. In the most recent playtest session, some people were out on a boat and then they got shipwrecked on the boat, and they had to stay on this island for a while and train over the course of many months before somebody followed them, or somebody found them, and they'd all gotten tougher, because they've been training that time. And also part of, like, all the mechanics are structured with a sense of timing in mind, like how long are these things going to take? Do you have time to do this? And let's pace out what's going on. The training mechanic is really interesting because if you don't, oh my God, this is a whole thing. One of my criticisms of many tabletop role-playing games from a design perspective is the numbers often go up as you increase in levels, like the numbers of things that you do, but the difficulty ratings go up too. And all that does is erase base competence, because it means that, like, as you're trying to hit the higher numbers, you're getting higher numbers. It doesn't actually make you better at the thing that you're good at. It makes you worse at everything else. So when you're starting off, you kind of have a fair shake at being able to do anything, pretty much. You've got a base competence. But as your character progresses, they specialize, which gives the illusion of specialization. But you're actually getting worse and worse and worse, which is fine if the game is structured around the trade-off of getting better and worse, right? And accordingly, in Fight to Survive, as you age, you don't take the hits as well, and your body starts to fall apart even as your skill advances. So, like, just because you're older doesn't, like, you do hit a sweet spot, like in the prime of your life, but like after a while, age starts to catch up with you, and this is the way it is. Like, you might want to retire, you might want to go teaching or something, right? So we're trying to avoid that rat race, but give advancement some relevance, because one of the tropes of American martial arts movies or of Eastern martial arts films is the training montage, right? Like Rocky IV is probably the best example I know, which is like 3-minute training montage, 10-second conversation with Adrian, another 5-minute training montage that's even better, and then you go into the final fight that lasts the next 45 minutes in the movie. Like, that's why people like Rocky V, is because it's basically just like garbly-gook, then training montage, big fight. And the training montages are tremendous, and people are really pumped about them, and they really like them. But let's try and incorporate that in a role-playing game, and let's try to not make that a joke. Like, let's try to make that relevant and serious to what's going on. So how do we introduce an advancement mechanic without getting into a rat race with higher numbers equal higher difficulty equal, and there are systems that deal with that, and there are systems that deal with that well, but the worst offenders are perhaps some of the best known systems. So characters can engage in training routines and advance the technique in their moves so that they can better match up against other technique. Like, remember when we were fighting earlier and I kicked you because your kick wasn't as good as my kick because I had more technique? Well, that's because I was training for a long period of time in the basement of a butcher shop, just kicking giant hawks of meat. That's how I spent my summer. So, my training technique advanced, and trying to make that so that it can be something that happens every year. It can be something that's exciting, and be something characters can invest in as they build themselves up. So the sense of anticipation of like, yes, I need to advance. I need to go into the, I hate to give a good example or a fantastic example like Dragon Ball, but like there'd be whole character arcs that were just training sequences, right? Because they want to delay getting into the fight as long as possible. But it's also part of filling up the meat of the genre, like the meat of what else is going on. Like, people are going on like bus rides and having emotional experiences. People are getting into arguments like, Rocky, you don't have to fight. I have to fight. This is who I am. I'm a fighter. And like, people are having those kinds of exchanges, and people are getting into fights. And I see a lot of role-playing games where you can get into a fight, sure, but like, why? Like, where's it coming from? Why do you want to do this? Let's make this meaningful. And that is why I made Fight to Survive.
I could say a few other things, but I think that's a wonderful place to wrap up. So we'll share the link to the Kickstarter for Fight to Survive when it goes live on this video, and we'll get this up. And at some point, it'll be on the Composed Dream Game Marketplace in one fashion.
Absolutely, yeah, it will. Thank you so much, Joshua, for having me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for letting me babble. For the last 6 months, anybody who I've gotten alone in a dark corner has been subjected to this kind of rant, and I really appreciate it.
It was very interesting to hear everything for me, and it's nice to have somebody who to get that passion as well.
Oh, and just as a quick addendum, I'm Canadian. Ian McLean is Canadian. The editor we've got is Canadian. There's a distinct effort happening on the part of this to make it all Canadian. Everybody involved will be Canadian, because there's so much talent in the Canadian tabletop role-playing game industry that is largely satellited, in little pockets. I really want to use Radio James Games and RadioJamesGames.com to bring together Canadian talent in a way that involves, a business, that involves remuneration, that involves more than just appreciation through thumbs up on social media. So Canadian talent and paying that talent. Right.
Well, that's wonderful, and that's certainly something I wholly endorse as well through various ways. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.